Hello, friends. Welcome to this first conversation in a series of conversations that I will be having with author, chaplain, patient advocate, and family advocate, Evie Lennon. Evie is the author of Drawing Comfort for Chronic Conditions. I met Evie a few years ago online, I think,
Yeah.
and we just connected. And I got her book, and I learned so much from her book about how heroic it is to live with the chronic conditions. And I've learned about language from Evie, so I'm always going to be asking her to correct my language as she does. And together, we're going to help create more awareness, emphasizing the valor, the hidden strength, and extra abilities that
Mm.
people with long-term physical and mental challenges develop. So, Evie, hello, welcome.
Hi. It's always good to see you.
This series stemmed from one podcast that you did with me, Evie. We had one podcast. You were one of the first guests I invited to my new book show podcast, Your Book, My Time. So, since I just said I read about your book, I really knew right away I wanted to have you as a guest on the podcast. And then that conversation was so rich, so deep that spontaneously in the middle of that conversation, I said, we need to do this. And that was only a few weeks ago. And here we are already making it happen. So, for full disclosure, for complete, total, utter confidence, I do this all the time. Evie, you do not. So, this kind of thing is new for you. So, I just want to invite you to relax and enjoy this opportunity to share your message. So, I want to ask you, what is that seminal message about, the heroism from living with a chronic condition?
I think that people have a lot of hidden battles that nobody sees. And it's easy to internalize the way that people may view people who are, in the past, we called them invalids, which literally breaks down to invalid. And
Mm.
um, and because I have a daughter who's quite heroic. She's an athlete who happens to be paralyzed below the waist, but plays wheelchair basketball. When I became disabled myself, it was impossible for me to take on um, that sort of message of inferiority. Um, and in fact, my seminal message would be to appreciate and define for yourself the extra abilities that your situation is requiring of you, and to begin to focus on how brave and resilient you actually are.
Mm.
Uh,
I want to say that I know that you know this, but I just want to share that I've learned so much from you about this thing. I don't think you had ever said to me the thing about invalid, which literally means invalid. But boy, talk about being impeccable with your word. Talk about words matter. Talk about, how language can, help you rise or sink, right? But I've learned so much from you about what it feels like to be in the body of something that's difficult and chronic. And that really speaks to me because in my coaching with women, in the second half of life, so many people have something. Your precious daughter's difficulty, which I know her to be such a hero, so strong, so brave, so courageous, showing up, stepping in, and really being uh, taking the control that she can. There's grown women who are not really able to do that. And this is really where I think this piece of the conversation is, that, that I've learned from you as you keep talking in this way about the empowerment that can be had. I know that that's everything for you.
Well, what is really burning in my heart today is, your focus on women and empowering women is so important. And I'm aware of that in talking to somebody I just interviewed for the first time yesterday. I met her when I was staying at a hotel, taking my mom on a little vacation. And I overheard her say something about a chronic condition. And every time that we have a conversation with each other, we are empowered because we learn that our experiences often were isolated and we're not talking to one another. But as soon as we begin to talk, just to hear one or two or three stories, you begin to realize if I'm experiencing any difficulty in the medical system, say, that is not a reflection. And a lot of the heroism takes place in the persistence of pursuing a diagnosis, only because it's life-saving, empowering. And this person I talked to yesterday, she's a producer and a director of plays, and she noticed she was having difficulty walking, and she fell twice in a row and thought, okay, I really need to be persistent. So the fourth doctor that she saw did something. Are you still there? I think I might have lost
Yes,
you.
go ahead. Go ahead.
We had a storm and one of our cables is knocked down, so I'm so grateful
You're
we
fine.
disconnected.
I wanted you to I want you to speak and be heard, so I took myself out of the screen for a second. So you're telling the story of that woman. I'll be back.
Okay. So she on the fourth doctor visit, she had interaction the other doctors did not provide, which is simply that this doctor, whose name I wrote down because he is also heroic, Vashsavanos, Dr. Vachsavanos said, I'd like to see you walk. Let me see your gait, which none of the other doctors had done. They told her that she was simply old and overweight. But she actually had a condition that was causing her foot to turn outwards counterclockwise. And when she had a growth which other doctors discounted removed, she was able to regain her mobility and movement in that foot. So there's a persistence that's required, and we're often ashamed that we need to be persistent. And she asked a question. She called me back after we talked, and she said, I'm wondering how much of this has to do with being a female, because my husband goes to the doctor and it's never
I'm losing your audio.
that this is such a go ahead. She came to realize her daughter was losing her hearing, and the doctor said he finally sent her to the audiologist and said, please tell this mom it's a piece moment that this child she for being her from spacious to withdrawn. And it was very small things the mother observed. It turns out she had lost hearing completely in one ear and only had 78% of, or no, she had lost 78% in the other ear. Um, so when Neva called me back, I said, you know what? Let me check that out. Let me see what the statistics say. So there was a study of about almost 7 million people. I believe it was in Denmark. I can double check that. And found with looking at 18 different diseases that women were diagnosed 4 years later. Uh, and that can be, you know, pretty critical to get an early
Yeah.
diagnosis when you're talking about
Well,
something like cancer.
yeah, but not just cancer. I mean, from a health perspective, it's critical to get an early diagnosis. But per the story you were just telling me, I think I lost your audio for a second about a mother advocating for her daughter. From a mental health and emotional well-being perspective, this is one of the biggest areas where we find difficulty for women who simply do not feel believed. Later, it could be years later, they get diagnosed with Lyme's disease or lupus or chronic fatigue syndrome, or RA, rheumatoid arthritis, or any inflammation, internal inflammation, even celiac. Of course, that's not just women, but we know that these people feel crazy. They feel like they're going crazy from they know something's wrong. And I've learned this from you also, Evie. This is another important piece of our conversation, the self-advocacy and also the patient advocacy that somebody else might do. But from a perspective, of course, if it's cancer, or any other, medical illness condition, from a physical perspective. But honestly, Evie, in your book, I'm Drawing Comfort for Chronic Conditions, one of the things that I really tuned into was the way it feels to be in the body, the way it feels to be in the mind. And that can be extremely debilitating. And so this idea of creating awareness of the chronic heroics or heroism that arise from chronic conditions, I want to just really connect up this synapse that when you're in the body of that, when you're in the body, you're in the skin of that, and you're dealing with it, you're facing it, you're feeling it, but you're not being believed by others, whether it's somebody in your family or a doctor or multiple doctors that you go to. That requires you to be a hero. Now, would you agree, like that's one of the ways you talk about it?
Yeah. In fact, I'm wearing a medal. The other day I said, I deserve a medal. And then I found this in my daughter's toy box.
Yeah. Lift it up higher.
Sometimes
Lift
you
it
have
up.
to give yourself a medal,
Love it.
because when we're a fish in water, we can't see. Uh, we're often sweaty and messy, and when we're being heroic, I put a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King in my book because it's sometimes easier to see heroism when it's not in perhaps the battle that you're embroiled in. Um, I'm sure when he was in the Birmingham jail and not being believed and not being heard, he kept speaking. And we often measure our success by how well received or heard our words are. And I think it's important for us to know that your voice, you can throw the ball, but you can't make someone catch it. But eventually, even having that voice, even if you're the only person who knows this is my truth, whether it's racism is real or something's going on with me, as in the mother who said my daughter is deaf and the doctor laughed at her. now she's a 31-year-old teacher who's empowering a whole generation of kids, because this mom, she didn't let herself be silenced.
Yeah. I mean, giving voice, as a confidence coach,
Hmm.
people do tell me all the time, as you yourself have said, I feel more confident, from working with you or whatever, but it's
Yeah,
partly only really a matter of validation. It happened
that
this morning.
val-
Go ahead.
no, go ahead, please.
It happened this morning in this very house. My friend's sister came over and just casually we were talking about her business related situation. And she's a mature woman, a very mature woman. And yet I asked a couple of my clarifying questions and she said, "Thank you so much." Like, really, it's the same thing. I feel heard. I know what to do. I feel like I thought I knew what to do, but I wasn't sure. And now with your feedback, I'm ready to go. And so again, Evie, those two stories that you told, the woman, the older woman who was having a problem walking, and then the mother, with the child,
It's
you
important
are,
to point out she's the same person.
oh, that was the same. Oh, we missed that part of the story.
Yes, she's actually the same person.
Oh, the mother who had her own problems also advocated for her own daughter. And
Right.
this is so important. Evie, let's take a minute to talk about the term chronic conditions. Okay. So you're the author, you're the artist, and you chose to use the term chronic conditions in the title of your book. I've learned from you, but I wanted to ask if you could take a minute or two to really talk about what you mean by chronic conditions. I call this translation so that we make sure that you and I are talking about the same thing and that our listeners can see themselves in our conversation.
Well, first, I just have to say that, you know, it's such an important, what you do is such an important part of the equation, because it's a rare thing to be heard.
Mm.
That is a holy space that you create. And you know, if I'm honest, I'll say that we all have these moments, no matter what conditions we're dealing with. And I believe we are all on a continuum of named and unnamed problems that require us to dig deep to keep going, often while being invalidated.
Mm.
Um, and there's times that we feel like our very spark is going to be extinguished, which is why, you chose to call this a conversation, which I think is where change happens. It is in these critical moments when somebody sees you and hears you, and then you go a step farther and you value what the person is saying. It's a life changer. I want to encourage you, as not a sidebar, if you are a woman in the second half of your life, this woman is a healer. A healer.
Thank you.
And I've been around for, 58 years. And, um, some of the experiences I had with her are some of the single most empowering moments of my life. I would not be sitting here right now. Uh, there comes a point, that's why I'm so appreciative of the continuity of putting your voice out there, because it's so easy to get discouraged.
Mm.
And encouragement, um, is important. So it's about the interactions that we have. You talk about chronic conditions. I think a lot of people have said to me, I'm not chronically ill, I don't have a disability, but I really related to your book. I think that there's any condition that's relentless. You do trauma informed work, it becomes traumatizing after a while. And we don't see ourselves as heroes. We don't see ourselves, even soldiers, don't see their own heroism. So I, wrote this book initially. It was about the workplace. Um, I think workplace dysfunction can be as damaging as any messed up family system.
Mm.
So being in corporate America, it could be a chronic condition because it affects our mental health.
So this is really important for our listeners, for our viewers. Remember, we're starting a conversation that's going to last all year long. And so please, we are interested in your questions, your thoughts, your feedback. And I just really want to call out what we're saying here. You know, Evie, when I picked up your book, I had in mind chronic conditions as physical conditions. But this is where this conversation is so important. And that we're also going to talk about that for sure. But the chronic condition is about how you feel. And really, to be the soldier, you could be the soldier in your war with how you feel, because what we know for sure is how so many people feel under the surface, which is out of sync with who they are above. And we're in the soul connection business, and even, you know, speaking directly to people with chronic mental health conditions, chronic emotional conditions, chronic physical conditions, chronic difficult conditions at work, or as you just said, in a family system. We are speaking to you, and we want you to join this conversation, and we want you to know that there's two people sitting here. I'm sitting here in Arizona right now. Where are you sitting again, Evie?
I'm sitting in Atlanta, Georgia, Clarkston,
Atlanta, Georgia.
Pacific.
And there's two of us here seeing you. And that's what we're doing here today. So, okay, so keep going. This is very important. I wanted to reiterate exactly what you're saying.
Well, being seen, being heard, it's a condition we all can relate to on some continuum. And I think what first really made me write this book that was initially about the workplace, it took a while for me to even want to own my own disability. As somebody said to me a long time ago, when I first started working in a children's hospital setting, I was overwhelmed by the conditions that people had. And a man named Casey Stanton said to me, don't confuse their situation with who they are. Later, that really hit home, because I felt like I was treated completely differently when I was no longer a teacher or the head of the art department at a, performing arts school, or I'm no longer a chaplain. I'm simply, not simply a disabled person. So you start asking who you are. But I'm getting a little sidetracked. We're talking about.
Well, let me pick up on this,
Yes.
this important point that you just made. Don't confuse their situation with who they are, but also how we see ourselves. So what you just shared with us is that you were an art teacher, right? You've been a chaplain. You are again now, but you've been a chaplain. And both of these helping professions that change lives were deeply, profoundly the skin that you were in either time of one, in that time or in that time. And then at some point you developed a disability, and you were no longer able to be an art teacher. And for a while you had to stop being a chaplain. And your very identity, your very soul identity in those types of professions was so caught up. And that's something that we also want people to hear, and we want to say out loud. We know We know that this happens when you have one of these autoimmune conditions, and the old you used to be able to do this, right? But the new you is like,
Yeah.
right, like this, right?
You
And
remind
or barely even. We know that's hard.
I'm glad you said that because speaking of trauma informed, there's times when we step into our own story. We play different roles. We're sometimes an advocate for others. Sometimes we remember our own story and we can get silent and frozen. Uh, but you remind me of the importance of voice, the importance of, if you are a friend or a family member, to listen and validate. We're so quick to say, oh, well, it's probably okay. Um, that may seem to be counterintuitive if we're calling somebody a hero, um, but it really um, kind of underlines the importance of people pursuing that diagnosis. It occurs to me that there is more than one way to save a life. I was a chaplain, and I was usually in the ICU, usually in the emergency department, usually when people, were in danger of losing their physical life. But I've chosen to focus on chronic conditions because people can lose their life, their vitality. And often when that happens, the person isn't heard, especially if they're female. Um, and because women present differently, um, and there are people I've interviewed who are no longer here, um, because
So
it took
you're
them a
speaking for
while.
them.
I am. I
Mm.
very much have certain people in my heart right now. A
Mm.
woman who was told she had indigestion, had acid reflux, and she had pancreatic cancer. Her nickname that I gave her was 3% because 3% of the people beat it. And what a lovely person that she was.
Mm.
And younger than me, and a mother of two, one of the most vivacious people I know. Um,
Yeah, this is reminding me, we just have another few minutes, but this is reminding me what you just said of something else on this, which is that when you're well and healthy, that's awesome, but you have no idea when and this could be you. This has really been shown to me through your book. For some reason, it just like reading your book, because of you are the artist and illustrator of the book as well. And so the whole package of presentation of what you created was able to be easily like integrated for me. But I think it's the Brain Injury Association, which says you could be one accident away from being our client. And so this is also important, so important for anybody who's listening to this, who's healthy and well themselves. First of all, many people who have chronic conditions. And secondly, you never know when this is going to be you. And so we all want to become impassioned advocates on this issue. So Evie, we just have about one more minute. I know we're going to finish this and you're going to be like, oh, I should have said this. I should have said that. And you know what? Go ahead and take out your notepad when we're done, because we're meeting again the third Friday in February. We are going to do this the third Friday of every month in 2022 at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have a 30-minute conversation to spark your conversation in your own concentric circles. And we want to truly, honestly, genuinely invite you to wherever you're seeing this. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, my YouTube channel called The Confidence Zone. We want to invite you to write comments, ask questions, and we will address them. So how does this feel, Evie?
It feels necessary. It feels fantastic to be in this conversation and encouraging conversation. And, I feel the need to give somebody that's listening out there something physical to hold on to,
Go
you know,
ahead.
because how do you cope? I'm perpetually humbled, you know, even though I literally wrote the book
Yeah,
on,
hold it up. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now we can see it. Yep.
even though I literally wrote the book, without going into a lot of detail, I'll say that what I most want readers and the audience to know is that if you are not being believed, it is no reflection on your credibility. Um, my daughter had 22 back surgeries on her spinal cord, metal rods in her back. For myself and my co-parent, that earned her a certain credibility. Anybody who can survive that, and she was asked to try out for the Paralympics USA wheelchair basketball team. She's experienced chronic pain since the end of September. That's taken her out of the whole season. That's pretty significant pain because not much stops her.
Mm.
So even with myself, a chaplain, my co-parent, a social worker who worked in that hospital system with a young lady who's pushing 16, who has proven herself to be a credible person, who does not speak lightly of pain, who has everything to lose by losing this part of her life, which is why this conversation is so important, because you can lose your life. You don't have to be in the ICU. You can lose the life that you knew and recognized, and you may find your voice not being heard. Doctors who should know better are saying, "Oh, it's probably psychological." Well, it will become psychological, if this traumatizing experience continues to happen. But what I want you to know is that your life is worth saving, and it may not. People may say, "Oh, you're out of the hospital. That's great," and that doesn't mean your problem has gone away. So, hang on to your truth, and hang on to a crayon. Um, I'm going to today post some free art prompts in my Chronic Valor Facebook page. I'll share it on Susan's page, her Legacy Facebook page, because it sounds outrageous that a crayon could be, or a skit, or any kind of art form can help you. But that imagination helps you transcend. I used to work with a chaplain who always talked about all we can hope for is to transcend. I did not know what he meant at the time. But, when you're stuck in your own story and you are feeling futility, you can sometimes transcend your own story and see it in a new light when you tell it in a different way, in a creative way. My daughter's not a mermaid. That would entail a whole nother series of maybe marine biologists. I felt exhausted. But my own train wreck of a life, I translated it into a shipwreck. So I'm going to be inviting you to create an alter ego and to tell your story in a different way. And you'll be surprised at what a shortcut it is to seeing yourself in your own hero's journey. I never was on a desert island, I never had this boat, though I would have loved it. But, I'm very excited to share
This is awesome. Okay, so we're gonna post that link. It'll be on your Facebook group. It'll be on my Facebook page and all the places that we're posting this. And so every month you're going to have something physical to do. Today, Evie is encouraging us to grab a crayon and create an alter ego. Tell your story in a different way and use your imagination, and that will serve you well. I love that. That's really, really great. All right. Well, we are out of time for this month. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Evie, for showing up. And along the way, we're going to hear more of your own story as well. And I'll look forward to that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Susan, for creating this incredible forum.
My pleasure, as always. And I'll see you next month.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.